And we're going to start chapter 7 today. And before we have a few announcements and an opening prayer, I thought it would be just good to take a minute or two just to kind of set up the book, since we do have some new faces in our crowd today. What have we learned from Solomon in the first 6 chapters of this book? What's going on? He seems to be a very miserable man. And then I'm seeing something here. What have we got? You know, we have kind of outlined that, right? Whether it's the way that we feel as a person or act as a person, or the way the world interacts with its human nature and nature itself, it seems to be on a big circle that just repeats itself, right? And we found out real early in chapter 1 that Solomon says that. Every time he looks for something new, he just sees the world repeating itself over and over again. So the more things change, the more things remain the same, right? And what we find through chapter 1 and chapter 2 is Solomon goes on this search. And he goes on this search for meaning. What does it really mean to live your life here, right? And he goes way deep into the depths of the thoughts of man and also the actions of nature. And he comes up to a conclusion. And what is the conclusion that he comes to? All is vanity. Everything, and he quotes, under the sun is vanity. And he doesn't just say it once, does he? He comes back to it again and again and again. And so when he sums up life, he sums it up with everything under the sun is vanity. And then he takes chapters 3 through 6. And what does he do then? In chapters 3 through 6, he just sits back and observes things through the lens that all is vanity. And that's when his observations come up very clear. He proves out his thesis that all is vanity, except what? God has to be involved. If God is involved in your life, guess what? Then He will give you the gift to enjoy this crazy life. But if God is not involved in your life, guess what? You're going to be a miserable person. There's no middle ground, is it? And so, all of a sudden, that's what we've gone through from chapter 1 through chapter 6, which is the summarization, which is all is vanity except when you allow God to penetrate your life, and then that allows you to enjoy this life that we have. And he goes in the end of chapter 5 and in some of chapter 6, and he starts talking about the value of friendship. God provides us friends in this world to do certain things and accomplish certain goals. And he talks about that. And he talks about the proper way to approach God in worship. Right? What did he say about that? What did he sum up there? And it's basically in chapter 5. What did he say is the proper way to approach God in worship? With reverence and respect, right? To be in awe of God. Why? Because God purposes all things, right? God is in charge. God thinks in ways that we don't. And who are we to think that we are on equal foot with God? And he goes in to point out that that's the whole idea behind vain worship, right? Is there types of worship that God distastes, dislikes, won't accept? All of us say absolutely. Have we ever done some of that? Have we ever came in to worship God unprepared? Have we ever come in to worship God mad about something and we don't allow the worship to do its proper service? What is worship? We thought about that? What is worship? Praise it. Worship goes from this way to that way. Not from here out, right? Worship is whose responsibility? It's ours. And every time we come into the worship assembly and we're not prepared and we're not ready, guess what that is? That's disappointing to God. And so, anyway, that's kind of what's got us here to chapter 7, which we're going to start today. And we're just going to focus primarily on the first 14 verses of chapter 7, because now Solomon is changing. Remember, Ecclesiastes is written from the wisdom point of view. It is with wisdom literature. It's set up different than prophetical literature. Okay? Wisdom literature says what? Wisdom literature is written in a kind of a case by case that says, if you do these things, then generally these things will happen. Okay? Prophetical literature, you see it in the minor prophets, you see it through the major prophets in the Old Testament. How is it written? Here's the law. Here's what you did. Here's going to be your punishment. And this is when it's going to happen. Okay? It's very 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Wisdom literature is not written that way. Wisdom literature says, here's a circumstance, and here is how we deal with it, and the best way to live your life. Take it or leave it, almost. And so all of a sudden we see Solomon, he's starting to really get into that in chapter 7, and that's what we're going to talk about today, which is he's going to have a mixture of Proverbs and just wisdom narration that he moves in between the first 14 verses. Okay? And a lot of us, if you haven't read chapter 7 before, you're going to read this, and the first thing you're going to say is, what a miserable person he is. Right? But if we look and scratch and dig a little deeper, we're going to say, you know what? This is a pretty wise man telling us and giving us advice on how to live our life. And now that I think about it, it really does make sense. So why aren't I doing these things? Yes.
Why did he switch to kind of a poetry type?
You know,
seems to me like he's kind of talking on kind of the dark side of the world.
Well, yeah, so that's a good point. And I would say that if there's 100 people in this class, 95 people share your thoughts. Okay? The question is, wow, he's really switched to kind of a different style of writing here in chapter 7. Why did he choose to do that? I don't think any of us know, Jimmy. You know, we just know this, that God gave him the gift and a measure of wisdom that was beyond everybody else except for Christ. Okay? So we can't say he didn't know what he was doing. And don't forget, he also wrote most of the other wisdom literature, and he wrote in this poetic style. So perhaps that was his natural style, right? Proverbs, you know. And the other part is, seems like he's writing from the dark side. We got to remember the life of Solomon. Was the life of Solomon always a bed of roses? No, he had some serious, what do you call, roller coaster. He was on a serious roller coaster, wasn't he? He had some high times and he had some low times. Ups and downs.
I think his wisdom is kicking in, and he is learning and applying that. He is.
I think you're exactly right. We've said at the very beginning of this book, we said that this book was probably written over a long period of time. At least we know it was a collection of his activities over a long period of time. Right? And in chapter 7, we're starting to see wisdom really kick in, and it's almost like he's talking to himself, wanting us to learn. and perhaps he's hit the low points, and now his wisdom is starting to bring him up. Okay? Yes, ma'am?
If we had good times, we wouldn't know how to deal with the bad.
Well, isn't that the truth, right? The comment was, if everything was a bed of roses and all we had was the good times, how would we know how to get out of the bad?
As you read all this, you hear a lot of people saying, why doesn't God just stop all the pain? Why doesn't He stop, everything from happening? And we can see it right here because someone was learning from this. That, you see His wisdom and understanding that calamities do make you wiser. Learn how to deal with them.
The comment here was, and I was going to read something about that. The comment is, there is a reason why God doesn't just make it all a bed of roses. Because just like Solomon is learning from his mistakes, we too learn from ours. It reminds me in James. James chapter 1 verse 2, my brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials. Count it all joy when bad things happen, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. Let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. We grow when we fall into adversity, don't we? You're seeing it right here with Solomon. Okay? Yes, sir.
Everything is a bed of roses here. We wouldn't have anything to look forward to.
That is true. Yes, sir?
Sometimes adversity can bring us back to God also.
Sometimes we need a spank to get back in line, don't we? Yes, sir?
I've heard the roller coaster analogy quite often, but before I found church at all, they used the theory of a pendulum. And you swing one way and then you swing the other. And it may be more of a pendulum effect of just human nature, because you go along and you don't know if that stove's going to burn until you touch it. Then you say, I'm not doing that anymore, so you swing the other way. And for a lot of other things that we do in our lives, sometimes if you never have seen it, when it happens, you don't even know what it is. So how are you going to deal with that?
Yeah, it's a good point, right? And I think if we kind of take that set of thought, which is sometimes we don't even realize we're off the path until we run into a tree limb. And then all of a sudden that gets us back on the path. So what is Solomon telling us? He's saying, sit back, let God into your life, let Him work within you, so when you do get off the path, you'll know it more clearly. You'll know it quicker. So these have been really good comments. So let's take what all we've said here. Like Jimmy was talking about, he seems to be kind of talking from a dark place. He seems to be somewhat distressed. Then we come into the thing of, we realize that we even need correction and we need to learn from mistakes to be better. So now right here, starting in chapter 7, verses 1 through 14, he's going to start giving us little snippets of wisdom and knowledge that are going to allow us to live better lives. And that's really what he says. If you want to live a life close to God, with God, do these things. Now let's just kind of work our way through them, because some of them I think are they're contrary to the way human nature thinks. Okay? So let's just take the first one. He says a good name is better than precious ointment. What's he talking about? He's talking about your reputation. He says your reputation is better than a precious ointment. And here a precious ointment is talking about luxury. It's talking about wealth. Your name, your reputation is better than what you make. Is better than your value. Is from a materialistic standpoint. Do we believe that? Because we spend a lot of money. We spend a lot of time trying to make a lot of money. But do we... That's right. But do we spend a lot of time to give ourselves a good name?
You use this you read it to me. A good reputation is better than expensive pleasure.
Okay, even better. Yeah, good. I like that version. A good name is better than expensive pleasures. What is a name worth? Can you take money with you when you die? Does a name stay around after you die? Does your reputation, your family who is living on past you, do they still live with your reputation? Your reputation is of the utmost importance, right? How many of us want to die with a good name? All of us do, right? Everybody does. Are we really working hard to acquire that? Just a thought. Because he says in Proverbs 22:1, a good name is to be chosen rather than great riches. A good name is to be chosen. I thought that was real interesting. We've heard that Proverbs 22:1 a lot, right? But for the first time, when you read a series of verses, every now and then you'll see a word that gets your attention, because it says a good name is to be chosen. That means we have a choice. Are you going to choose to live your life in accordance with God that gives yourself a good reputation? Or are you going to choose to do something else? You can't choose your relatives, but you can sure choose how you're going to live your life, can't you? I'm going to move on past that because... Yes, sir.
Isn't the underlying secret of a good name found in the fruit of the Spirit?
Yeah. Yeah, you can expound on that. I know where you're going on that. Yes.
Esteemed is better than silver or gold. But you notice it didn't say self-esteemed.
We're going to get to pride in just a minute. Don't get in front of me.
We had a revelation when we moved here, because coming from where we came from, everything was contract. That you came here, and this was a few years ago, but you came here and a handshake deal with the right person was better than any contract. I mean, if that person had a good name and a good reputation, the handshake meant everything.
Right. Y'all came from California, right? I just want to throw that out. Aaron?
I think it's important that we know that that Solomon was the wisest man that ever lived, but yet he made bad decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So to know the choice is one thing, but to make the choice is what we're talking about with the good name. It's knowing it is one thing, but choosing it and being obedient is far more important.
Absolutely. Just because we are, quote, smart, and just because we're, quote, wise, and we read our Bible and we really try to live our life the way God wants us to live, does that mean that we're never going to make a mistake? Now, let's try not to make some of the mistakes that Solomon made. Let's try to minimize our mistakes. You know, both of my sons played a lot of sports growing up. And when they were playing baseball, we used to talk about don't compound your errors. Everybody's going to make an error. But you know when people just throw up their hands is when the shortstop gets the ball and you throw it away to first base and you get an error there. And then the first baseman goes and gets it, and he throws it to second, and he throws it out in the outfield. And the next thing you know, the guy comes all the way around to score because of a compounding of one error. Let's not compound our errors, right? When we make a mistake, let's live up to it. Let's face it up front. Let's ask God to forgive us or our friends to forgive us. Okay? And then let's move on. Because what does God do? He forgets it. We have to start doing that. Let's move on, or we're never going to get finished here. A good reputation finds honor before God and men and benefits us after death. I mentioned the roll call of faith there in Hebrews chapter 11. Wouldn't you like to be mentioned if the world is still around in 150 or 200 years from now, and if there's still a White House Church of Christ that meets right here? Wouldn't you like to be mentioned 100 years from now when they said, she did this? That just means what? Your reputation is still intact. Make a difference. When you get a chance, look at Luke chapter 10, verses 17 through 20. I guess we'll just read that. I've already kind of went way over time, so we'll have to finish this next week, so we might as well slow down. Luke chapter 10, 17 through 20. All right, we're going to digress a little bit, so I'll set this up. The thought behind here is Jesus picks the disciples and sends out the 70, and they're coming back. And it says in verse 17, then the 70 returned with joy, saying, Lord, even the demons are subject to us in your name. And he said to them, I saw Satan fall like a lightning from heaven. Behold, I give you the authority to trample on serpents and scorpions and over all of the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means hurt you. Nevertheless, do not rejoice in this, that the spirits are subject to you, but rather rejoice because your names are written in heaven. It underlines what this is all about. This whole book is to teach us how to live our lives so that we can go to heaven when we die, right? And one of the ways to do this is to make a decision to choose a good reputation for yourself and follow through with it. And what happens here is, the reason why I picked this deal, there was 70 men who were sent out and chosen to go spread the gospel and do some things. They obviously had a good reputation. They obviously were trusted people. And when they came back, they said, we can't believe it. We have all kinds of authority over these demons and everything. Jesus says what? He says, careful. Careful, Mr. and Mrs. Pride. You need to be rejoicing not because you have this ability that I gave you. You need to be rejoicing because your reputation has got you written into the book of life. Now, let's dig a little bit on that, because some of you might be saying, man, you're going all over the place, Brody. Why are you talking about this when we're talking about a reputation? Because many times we let pride decide which kind of reputation we're going to have. Yeah, right. Don't we? Don't we, instead of saying, I'm making up my mind to be this type of person, well, I got some other things I'd like to do first. Maybe this or that. And all of a sudden, maybe there's some money involved over here, or there's some power involved over here, and maybe that might get me off of my track for my reputation, but I'll come back around to it in the past, in the future. Don't do that. He's saying even if you have all the powers to control demons, the only reason for you to be happy is because your name is written in the book of life, and I've given that to you. Yes, sir.
It's a very short step between self-confidence and arrogance.
That's too big. The comment was there's a very short step between self-confidence and arrogance. That's a very good point. It is right there. What keeps us from being arrogant is when we allow Christ to live through us. Why is it that we have such a hard time with this? Do I know?
Because we're human.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. What? Yeah. We have this choice, and we just don't want to commit to being the people that God requires us to be. And Solomon is writing this book to say, let me help you. If you're reading this book, don't read it out loud to everybody in here. Read it quietly to yourself and say, am I doing this? So the first thing that he says is he's talking about your reputation. Look at the second thing he says. The day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. Your death day is better than your birthday. Now, if there was a bunch of kids in here, they would start throwing songbooks at me. But let's think about that. Is it? Is your death day better than your birthday? Only if God is part of your life, right? And that's kind of what Solomon is saying here. If you have secured your reputation in the eyes of God, then guess what? You have secured that book of life, and your death day is a great day. That's right. You are immortal, give or take.
Brody, we've all been to funerals like that. We're sad for ourselves, but we know it's a celebration for them. That the songs are happy and all that sort of thing.
Let's go ahead and talk about funerals, because he spends a lot of time. Solomon spends a lot of time here talking about funerals. What does he say? He says, everybody loves a party, but everybody needs a funeral. What's he mean by that? Well, that's Brody talk. Everybody loves a party, but everybody needs a funeral. What happens at a funeral?
Well, in a party, you're celebrating life or birthdays or whatever, and when you attend a funeral, you realize your mortality and where you're going, or what you have to face. That's part of life.
Yeah, this is Solomon saying the person who seeks to be in line with God spends a lot of time in self-analytical state saying, how can I do better? And do you do that better at a party, or do you do it better at a funeral? When you see life's brevity right there. Funerals are a chance for God's people to really sit down and look inside and say, that will be me, maybe even tomorrow. How can I be better prepared to die? Yes, sir?
The funeral a few months ago, I heard an analogy that I thought was good. It's like every person on the face of the earth is standing in line for the judgment. We don't know where it's the first of the line, or the middle of the line, or the back of the line. But whichever we are, we better be ready.
That's right.
What he's saying too, death is fine. You've already sealed where you're going to be going. Is it better for you to die?
Now that's a deep question. It's not better for you to die if you're not ready. So here we are. We know it's appointed for man to die once and then the judgment. Hebrews chapter 9, right? take time to go to a funeral and let that sink in and ask yourself the real question, am I ready to die? If the answer is anything like, I hope so, or I think so, then the answer is probably no. And it's time to get busy getting close to God. God is standing there with His hands open. All you have to do is walk in. Now, one second. If you ask yourself that question at a funeral, that will be me, am I ready? And you're certain yes. Take this opportunity to get closer. Right? That's what Solomon's talking about. Life is not just one big party. This is a serious span of time to get your affairs in order to live forever with God. And to your point, none of us know if we have a day, a week, a month, or 50 years left. I can tell you, I was in a church building several years back, and I heard a sermon and watched a prayer, and the next time we met, that person was gone. We only have a finite amount of time to get serious about pleasing God. And that's why I think, Jimmy, this book is kind of written from a little bit of a darker perspective. Okay, to answer your question, Solomon is getting our attention and says, this isn't fun and games. This is serious business. So let me get your attention. Your reputation is more important than luxury items. A funeral is better for you than a party on Saturday night. Yes, sir.
Much like what Paul said, he said to me, live trying to die gain. But he also said, I was pressing forward.
Right.
Yeah, trying to get closer and closer to Christ.
You know, Paul realized that and you have to constantly work at it, right? Because he also knew what Jeremiah talked about. And I've got Jeremiah chapter 20, 14 through 18, and it's talking from kind of reading from a dark side. Talks about the day of one's birth is the beginning of many sorrows. Why is that? The day that you're born is the day that a lot of your sorrows begin. Because we live in a fallen world, right? And that's what Solomon is saying. I've seen this world. I've never seen anything new. When you think you've seen something new, it's just because we forgot about it from days past. Okay? And he goes into saying, the day you're born is the day your sorrows start. And you're like, man, that's kind of, Somebody turn and let's read. Yes, sir.
You read that.
Okay.
Solomon didn't have the opportunity to read from Matthew 25.
Right.
And in Matthew 25, starting around verse 30, something like that, we read of how the judgment is going to take place. Mm-hmm. And so we have that
right
in front of us, and Solomon didn't have.
Yeah, David, that's a very good point. So remember, when Solomon's writing this is, my math is a little fuzzy here, 900 years before Christ. If I'm off, please don't come flog me. Somewhere around 900 years before Christ. He did not have the whole gospel revealed to him at that time, did he? He just knew that there was a set of laws that he needed to follow, and he was having a hard time following them. And matter of fact, it was impossible to follow. So the only way that he could ever have solitude is to get as close to God and let God take care of it.
You think that Solomon had a hard time because as God increased his wisdom, he also increased his wealth. And so that, and his personality and his kingdom. So that Solomon had a very hard time trying to deal with his wisdom because he had a lot of...
I think that could be, we don't know, but I think that's certainly a good school of thought, right? You give mortal man the materialistic things that he had, the vision to build the things that he had. You remember, Solomon was a builder, and then he was also a natural leader. So kings of the known world and queens of the known world would come and deliver untold wealth just to sit and hear him talk. And I'm sure he battled pride and arrogance, and that was part of the problems, I'm sure. Look at Jeremiah. Jeremiah was a prophet in the Old Testament. Jeremiah, I can't remember off the top of my head how many years Jeremiah was a prophet for. Something tells me either 20 or 40. Some of you scholars in here may correct me on that. Bible leads us to believe that Jeremiah never had a convert. Never had a convert because of just the ill of the people at the time. Jeremiah 20, and he was also called the weeping prophet. Sometimes you hear about Jeremiah, he's called the weeping prophet, and that's why he was down pretty much his entire career. Jeremiah 20, 14 through 18. Cursed be the day in which I was born. Let the day not be blessed in which my mother bore me. Let the man be cursed to whom brought news to my father, saying, a male child has been born to you, making him very glad. And let man be like the cities which the Lord overthrew and did not relent. Let him hear the cry in the morning and the shouting at noon, because he did not kill me in the womb. My mother might have been my grave, and her womb always enlarged with me. Why did I come forth from the womb to see labor and sorrow, that my days should be consumed with shame? Wow. So let's dig a little deeper. What's going on here? He sees the need for the people to respect and love and trust in God. And he spends his career preaching this. And nobody takes him up on it. And he feels like a failure. And he looks around and he just sees wickedness. And you know what he sees? He sees people wanting money more than a reputation. He sees people that just sit around and want to party all the time, instead of doing introspective questions and answering on the need for God. And he looks around and he just sees sin. And he says, I haven't been able to affect this world. I shouldn't even be here. I shouldn't even be born, he says. Okay? Enter Solomon's comments. The world is a series of time that's just going to repeat itself again. When it says here, the day of one's death is better than the day one is born, because when one is born, sorrow comes into your life, because we live in this world. But prepare yourself for the day that you die, because now we live with God forever.
Brother, when you go to a funeral, or you have a funeral of somebody, your mother, your dad, it puts the office you're saying much more in perspective.
Because sometimes you don't realize that until it's somebody very close to you.
Right.
And sometimes it changes people.
Change your life.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll go to a funeral, and it just might change your life. And it should. Yes, sir.
I don't know how this fits, but I've worked with a couple different types and quality of companies. One company I worked for thought that all of its employees were just bad people. And over a period of time, guess what? They were. And I've worked at other companies that praise the people all the time and said they didn't steal, they didn't cheat, they filled out their time cards correct. It could be the way he's looking at it. I can only see through these colored glasses.
Yeah.
And sometimes, well, it took, what did you say, 900 years later that we got the other color?
Yeah. Thank God he got that color. No, that's right.
People through that, you say, there's good out there.
Right.
You know,
Right.
don't look at Washington and we'll be okay.
Last comment, Aaron.
I think we talked about it from the funeral, it's really a forced time reflection.
Mm-hmm.
You know, hearing that, you know, we should spiritually get sober and more time to read, you know, that we should stop and reflect on our lives and say, you know, where am I going, what am I doing? And instead of these forced times in our lives, when it's because of an object that we're asked to do this, you know, what's the better? We all, as Christians, when we stop and reflect on our lives, just not because of any event, but we're forced to say, you know, what direction am I going, how am I serving? That should be a not a daily and very frequent act of the Christian life. And
No, that's right.
telling us, you know, just in this class this morning about how important it is to stop and reflect.
That's exactly right. And so as we stop and reflect on when we're at a funeral, stop and reflect chapter 7. Read it before you go to bed and say, do I need to change myself a little bit? We'll finish this lesson next week. I'll also print out the following lesson, but we may not even get to that because we've still got some pretty meat that we need to get through in chapter 7.